actually introduce him, but I'll do it since Nisha has given me the task. He is currently the Emerita Professor and Dean of Liberal Arts and Cultural Studies. Before Adamus University, he has retired as a professor from the Department of IR International Relations, Jadavpur University, Kolkata. His research areas are political science and area studies with special reference to Indian foreign policy, political economy and strategic studies of Southeast Asian and Indo-Pacific region, South China Sea issues, multilateralism with special reference to regional and sub-regional organizations, South and Southeast Asian region, Indian political thought. There were some more, and I have edited them, sorry for that. And there are some publications also which I have edited because of the paucity of time. I move over to the second chair of this session, Professor Shahara Ahmed. Ma'am, please come over to the stage. Dr. Shahara Ahmed is a professor of history and head of the Department of History at Rabindra Bharati University, Kolkata. She is an eminent environmental historian. She has contributed to several scholarly journals of repute. She is the author of Woods, Mines and Minds, Politics of Survival in Jalpaiguri and the Jungle Mahal, Epidemic Encounters, Communities in the Colonial World. She has also contributed to several book chapters. She is the secretary of the Society for the History of Science, Kolkata. Her areas of interest are environmental history of modern India, history of science, medicine and technology, socio-cultural history of modern India, diasporic studies. Then I have another job to do. I have to introduce the speakers for today. Before that, I request Dr. Shormishta De to please come on the stage. She is the second speaker, but being a woman, I'm doing this. I am introducing her first, and sorry, I beg your pardon, sir. I'll introduce Professor Partho Datto second. So, Dr. Shormishta De is Assistant Archivist, State Archives of West Bengal since 1994. She is the author of some very important books, Marginal European in Colonial India, Human Resource Management in the Days of John Company, 19th Century and Archival Exploration. This book she has co-authored with Bidisha Chakraborty. Several contributions on colonial and urban history she has contributed this to several learned journals and edited volumes. She will be speaking, and her paper will be chaired by Professor Shahara Ahmed. Now, I introduce and I request Professor Partho Datto to please come on the stage. Professor Partho Datta teaches in the School of Arts and Aesthetics, JNU. Before JNU, he also taught in Zakir Hussain Evening College, University of Delhi. He won some prestigious awards and honors like DFAIT Faculty Research Fellowship, Queen's University, School of Urban and Regional Planning, Kingston, Canada, 1999, Fellow, Nehru Memorial Museum and Library, 2005 to 8. His areas of interest are music history, classical tradition in North Indian music, recorded music and archives, urban planning, architecture and design. Among his many publications, he is the author of Planning the City, Urbanization and Reform in Calcutta, 1800 to 1940. So now I request Professor Trideep Chakraborty and Professor Shahara Ahmed to please take over the stage and conduct the session. Thank you.
So thank you very much. So we have a paucity of time. So already we are late. So I will go directly. I will request the respective two speakers. First I have to request Partho Datto to enlighten us, and then Shormishta, a student of Jadavpur University, the next one. Okay.
Slide. So thank you so much for this, for introducing me, and also I must thank Shuranjanda for inviting me to this seminar, and also I want to thank Shubhajit, who in fact first suggested that I should speak on Calcutta at the turn of the 20th century, and I also want to thank Nisha and Nirdosh and Boshudita for the very warm welcome. I've been having a very good time in Calcutta since yesterday. The topic is Calcutta in the sort of turn of the 20th century. You know why this was chosen, because this was the time when the revolutionaries and militant activity really started becoming organized and became very important, and they found their base in Kolkata. Now, of course, we can talk about Kolkata at that time. I'll just tell you what I plan to do. But first, I want to give you a flavor of what Calcutta must have looked like. You've already seen, actually, it's been flashing on the screen for some time. Certainly parts of North Calcutta, what did it look like in the early 20th century? So, let me see. So, this is a part of North Calcutta. It's as you can see, what's interesting about this slide is that there is a, इसको रोक कैसे रखते हैं? कहाँ गए वो? How do you hold the slide? It's not. Oh. हाँ हाँ ये तो कोंटा कोंटा टिपते हैं? यही तो टिप ना चलिए इसको होल्ड कैसे करेंगे सर? थोड़ा इसको 2 मिनट এটা টিপে ধরতে হবে তো ঠিক আছে আচ্ছা इसको मैं पकड़ के रखता हूँ ठीक है so as you can see it's an interesting kind of building it's an interesting building ecology because you have both sort of brick buildings it's gone again हाँ ऐसे ही कर दो आप ठीक है अब इसको ऊपर नीचे कैसे करेंगे एक मिनट so sorry this is taking these are so complicated छोड़ेंगे इनको हाँ ऐसे एक एक करके करते हैं ठीक है so as you can see this is the reason I'm showing you this slide I'll come back to this point again but there is what we would call quote unquote slums and also proper pakka buildings, right? This was the character of the city at that time. It's very important to note. Why it's important to note, I'll come back in a little while. Okay, so secondly, this is Chitpur Road, early 20th century. This is how it looked with the trams. I think it's quite interesting. I think you can see the Nakhoda Masjid right at the back. Some of you are familiar with this part of the city. This is Armenian Street. Again, you can see the bullock carts and the kind of transport that was used. Just to give you a flavor of what the spaces in Kolkata were like. This is the Great Harrison Road, which connects Shialda to, of course, and Howrah. Very interesting early 20th century. Harrison Road played a big role in the bases of militants in Kolkata. That's what I'm showing you this. This is Rosha Road before it had been widened. Again, early 20th century. And here also there were some bases of militants, Rosha Road. It's very interesting. Okay, so you get a sense of what this. So so let's ignore the slides, the things for the moment. This the pictures that we're showing. Now, what I wanted to do very briefly, there's not too much time, that actually complicate the relationship between revolutionary and militant activity and Kolkata. Now, if we complicate the relationship, then we have to ask some larger questions, which is larger questions which historians often address, which is what is the relationship between the city and politics, right? So that is what, do cities determine the nature of politics? That is a very important question that we have to ask. So was there a relationship between militant and revolutionary activity and the particular characteristics of we find in Kolkata at the turn of the century? It's a complicated question. It's not easy to answer it, but let me just speculate about how historians have actually dealt with it. Now, to probe this relationship between the city and politics, or militant and revolutionary activities and Kolkata, we have to understand the nature of militant activity. And on the other hand, we also have to understand the nature of the city, the nature of the colonial city. Only then we can try to find some kinds of relationship. And what I'm going to suggest is that it's very interesting that when we look at the nature of both these categories, the militant activity and revolutionary activity and the cities, we find there is one thing in common, and that is the colonial state. The nature of militant activity is very much defined by what they thought the colonial state was. And the nature of the city, that the urban spaces that we are talking about, was also to a large extent determined by how the colonial state actually intervened in urban spaces. And this came to a head at the end of the 19th century and early 20th century. So it determined what the city really looked like, right? So these are two things that's very important. The third thing, and this is very interesting, since we are talking about the colonial state, the relationship between militant and revolutionary activity and the colonial state also tells us something about the nature of the colonial state, right? So we can even explore that, and that also has also been commented upon by historians, right? At the end, I will very briefly give you 3 stray examples of responses of militants to the city. I say stray examples because you don't have too many examples of this. One will be from Kolkata, another will be from very early on of militant activity, not from Kolkata, actually from Maharashtra, but it will actually tell us something about the relationship between the city and politics. And there will be a third example, which is also a fascinating example, somebody whom we don't usually call a militant or revolutionary. This is the great Rabindranath Tagore. But he was very interested in all this. He even wrote a novel later in his life. But late in the 19th century, he wrote a fascinating essay, which tells us something about what he was thinking about both politics and the city. I'll just briefly talk about that also. Okay, so let me quickly, now the first point that I was trying to tell you is that if you look at the historiography of militant and revolutionary activity as the way the historians have dealt with it, let me just take a couple of names, very well-known names. My own teacher, Professor Shumit Sarkar's book on Swadeshi movement, very beloved. There's a great chapter there at the end, early revolutionary activity, I think one of the best chapters written. Then many, many years later, the Auroville-based historian Peter Heese's book, The Bomb in Bengal, very important book, I think beautiful narrative. Shoranjan Da was mentioning the importance of narrative, absolutely riveting narrative. And there is also another book which is my favorite, my personal favorite, which is also written by 2 Bengali historians settled in Delhi. They have passed away. This is Amit and Maya Gupta, right? They wrote a book called Defying Death, which is actually about revolution and militant activity right from the 1890s to the 1940s. It's a wonderful book. So I've taken most of the material from there. And if we quickly look at the activities of the, especially the Bengali militants in and what they were doing in Kolkata, let me just quickly give you some factual examples where they. So you just get a sense of the geography of militant bases in Kolkata, right? So we know that 1902 is a very important year. We know why it's an important year because first of all, Swami Vivekananda passes away. Barin Ghosh suddenly appears at Aurobindo Ghosh's house in Baroda, suddenly, and this brother just arrives. He's then sent off to Calcutta. He comes to Kolkata, and there, of course, Jiten Banerjee is already there. In 1902, Aurobindo also comes to Kolkata, and some bases are set up. In 1902, also the Anushilan Samiti is set up, right? So 1902 is a very important year, and somehow connections with Kolkata are being made. Let me just give you quickly what was happening. So we know that according to Shumit Sarkar, 1902, Sarola Devi Chaudhurani, she was not then Sarola Devi Chaudhurani, she set up an akhada. And this was in her father's house in a place we know now, Baliganj Circular Road, right? So there is that one thing. Then we find that Jatin Banerjee has set up a sort of another akhada in Upper Circular Road. So here we get a sense of where in the city these establishments are being set up. Then surprisingly, I'm skipping, Jatin Banerjee and Barin Ghosh have a fight. This is very famous. People have written about it. And, Peter Hees comments that this led to that the center in Calcutta was destroyed. Almost it seems the relationship between militant activity and Calcutta was going to be over. But that's not the story. We know the relationship with Calcutta continues. In 1905, Aurobindo he resigns from his job and he comes to Kolkata and settles there, right? So he settles. In 1906, Jugantor is launched in Kolkata. In 1907, the famous house in Maniktola, in Murari-Pukur Maniktola is set up, and the comment by Peter Hees is this was a suburban Anandamot. Right, it's very interesting, and then we know that they were being followed by the police all the time. So at some point, Hemchandra Daskonungo decides to shift base, and he moves to Rosha Road, right, and that's where it's one of the centers is happening. Then again, he keeps on shifting, and then at some point he comes to a place called Gopi Mohan Datta Lane, which is still there. It's still near Shambajar, right? So that's where he shifts his office. And then Harrison Road, the photo that I showed you, there were 3 addresses of Harrison Road, which the Jugantor group used. One they used as a kind of post office to leave messages to each other. Then there was another center where they were making bombs and so on and so forth. So what I'm telling you is that the city is very much present in militant activity, very much there. And all this material is from from the historians I have just mentioned to you. But what I find is, and this is a little bit of a problem, which is that historians tend to take this relationship between the city and militant activity for granted. They don't actually, as I said, complicate the relationship. What is the relationship? So as historians would like to say, we need to theorize it, right? We need to complicate it. We need to, a term which historians use all the time, we need to problematize it. Was there a relationship? And if the relationship, what consequences did it have? That is what we really need to understand. Now, now let's look at, as I said, I've stated the problem. Now let's look at, I'll do 2 things. Look at the nature of militancy and look at the nature of the city. I will go over the nature of militancy very quickly because what I was going to say, Suranjan Da has already said it in his lecture. So one of the things that we know is that the militant activity had a strong base in a chain of akhadas which were set up all over, or certainly in North Calcutta and some in South Calcutta also. And this had something to do with what is called the cult of violence. Right. But if you actually probe it a little deeper, you'll be surprised that many of them actually did not want to take the violent path. This is what the historians actually have written about. So let me just give you an example, a couple of things. So there is Satish Chandra Bose, who is very influenced by Vivekananda, and he goes to meet Nivedita, and he says, "Look, I want to do this," and she's not very impressed. And Peter gives this example. He says she told him, "Go to the slums, do sanitary work, work out with lathis and clubs, build up your bodies." Right? She wasn't interested in violent activity, or that is the impression that one gets from it. Or there is another example in Peter Heese's book, that somebody goes to Sharala Devi and says that the violence is the path that we will take, and she's very disapproving, very, very disapproving. What is most interesting is that from Peter Heese's book we know that that Aurobindo himself was quite non-committal, that he would neither say yes nor no to violence. And only at the last moment, when Barin would go and tell him, "Dada, I am going to do this," he would say, "Okay, fine." Right? So there is the relationship with violence and militancy and militant activity or revolutionary activity is quite complicated. That's what I'm trying to tell you. But what I want to point out is, what we do get is there is a lot of activity in the akhadas, and there is something to do with building up bodies. And there is, I'll just hint at it, there is a wonderful essay which was published many, many years ago by John Rosselli, and there he really talks about how this had something to do with Bengali men's notion of being effete, and and that effeteness meant a kind of lack of spirituality. So that was what they were really sort of trying to work at. And let me just quote you Peter Heese's comment on this. He says that Olushundil Shomiti became a byword for revolutionary terrorism in Bengal, but its origins were remarkably unmartial. Right? So it's very interesting. So I'm just saying that it's when we look at revolutionary and militant activity in Kolkata, the story becomes quite complicated. Right? Now, the second thing, and this is a interesting point which is made by Professor Shumit Sarkar. He says that if you compare the work of the moderates, the nature of moderate nationalist activity, and you look at the range of politics at this time, so there were the moderates, there were quote unquote the extremists, and quote unquote the revolutionaries and the militants, then he says there is remarkable similarity between the moderates and the and militants and revolutionaries. And why is that so? Because both of them believed in elite action. They did not really want to connect to larger sort of mobilizational forms of politics. This is a kind of critique, right? And this critique has actually come not from historians, as you know, even the militants themselves, like for instance, Hemchandra Kanungo's Bangla Biplab Prochesta and all, have actually talked about it. That what were the problems with militants here? Now, so the problem is that it is usually seen as it's usually seen as a kind of limitation. It's seen as some kind of limitation. Anyway, whether it's a limitation or not, we can discuss it. But the point is that we still gives us a idea of what the nature of this militant activity really was. The third thing, and this is very interesting, is that you will be surprised the response of the colonial state. It was very circumspect. If you read Peter Heese's book, and he has looked at this at some detail, the police were shadowing all the revolutionaries in Kolkata all the time, but they did not arrest them. And the sort of relation, the sort of even the private papers of Morley, the sort of the Secretary of State, and Minto, the viceroy, there is a lot of discussion on this. Should we not? And Morley kept on saying, no, 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 we can't do this. And what emerges is that there was a conflict between the nature of the colonial state and the nature of colonial law. They were often at loggerheads with each other. You know, when Barin Ghosh was arrested, he was given the choice of being tried by the jury system because the British said, you are a European, you're a British citizen, because he was born in London, in a suburb in London, right? So that offer was given to him, but he of course refused, right? So this was not, of course, later on when the British got more wiser to revolutionary and militant activity, they became, they dropped all these, this circumspectness that they had, but it also tells us something about the colonial state itself, and we must realize that the colonial state was not a monolith. It was there definitely not sort of, there was certainly a very strong division between the executive and the judiciary. And this sort of played out, particularly in fact, as when they were dealing with the revolutionary militants themselves, right? Okay, so we get a sense of how historians have tried to understand militant activity. I'm doing quickly, I've just summarized it for you from the existing historiography. Now let me quickly tell you about how historians look at the city, at Kolkata itself. What was happening in Kolkata, right? That is exactly at this time. Because really what we are trying to understand was there a relationship between Kolkata, the city, and militant activity? That's what we have to understand. You know, that's what those links we will have to really try to make. Now, I just wanted to tell you, there are some interesting theories about this. But firstly, there is this historian called David Arnold. He has written he's written many interesting essays and books. And one point he says, colonial cities are manifestly the most dramatic examples of colonial rule. And why is that so? What is the reason? And he says, because it was in the colonial cities that the ruler and the rule stayed side by side. So the possibilities of conflict were very high, right? So therefore it dramatized oppression in very importantly. Secondly, colonial cities are important because we know colonial cities are where we have the concentration of colonial institutions. So you have, say, the police, right? You have the law courts, 2 examples. They are centered in the cities. So that is where the colonial system is most visible. The colonial institutions are the most visible. Thirdly, the cities are of course very important because we have what is called the public sphere, right? And what historians call the public sphere. So we have very vigorous print cultures. So we know all the journalism that was happening, including the papers and the newspapers and the pamphlets that were being published, which exemplified militant and revolutionary thinking. Then there were associational sort of activities happening, particularly in the akhadas. There were new kinds of mobilization there which was happening. That is very, very important. That is also actually determined the kind of, it gave nature or tells us something about the nature of the city also. That's very, very important. So that colonial city had a certain sort of character is determined by some of these factors. Now, what is interesting is that the relation, I'm going to come back again to, but you can say, so what? I mean, you know, did the character of Calcutta really produce militant activity of some sorts? And here I have to tell you that historians have argued, you'll be surprised, that sometimes not only do we take city, the context of the city for granted, but sometimes we overestimate the connection between cities and politics. And let me give you 2 examples. One is Shumit Shorkar. You know, although he's not writing about militant activity here, there is a wonderful essay he wrote in the Shukanto Chaudhary 2 volumes, and there he's talking about the Bengal Renaissance. And his argument, please read it, it's very interesting. He says actually Calcutta has nothing to do with the Bengal Renaissance. Most of what happened in the Bengal Renaissance happened outside Kolkata, right? By the cultural activity, and then therefore his argument is that the relationship between Kolkata and Bengal Renaissance, what we generally call the Renaissance activity, is a post facto connection. It's been constructed. Actually, it was never like this. The city was not so important. And he actually goes on to make a very harsh comment. He said actually Bengali literature never produced somebody like a Dickens or a Baudelaire, like Baudelaire wrote on Paris, right? So there is this connection is actually a post facto connection. So basically he's being skeptical about this thing. So let's keep this in mind when we are talking about militants and the city also. Maybe we can ask this question. Was there a connection? Did the city play a role? Well, I mean, we need to be a little skeptical about it. The second thing is, and this is a very interesting comment by another very great historian, all of you know about him, he passed away some years ago, E.J. Hobsbawm. And Hobsbawm is writing about the relationship between Paris and politics, revolutionary Paris and politics. He has written an essay, and he said most people think Paris produced revolutionary politics, and his answer is no. You know, we always talk about revolutionary, sort of revolutionary Paris. He said no. He says it is not cities which produce revolution, but it is the nature of politics which produces revolution. So it depends upon what kind of politics is happening in the city that will produce revolutionary activity. It's not that just because the city is there, it will produce some kind of a relationship between, it will produce on its own some kind of revolutionary politics. So they are being very, very skeptical about this. Now, I'm coming to what was actually happening in Kolkata in what we call the turn of the century, which is roughly from the 1890s, say, to the 1910s. And here, the most important event that happens is actually in 1897-98, and this is the plague, the coming of the plague, right? And when we look at the history of the plague in Kolkata, we find that it leads to an explosion, right? And there is a flashpoint. If not an explosion, there is a flashpoint, and the flashpoint is exemplified by a series of riots which happened in Calcutta, kind of riots which happened in Calcutta from the 1890s onwards. Usually these are by poor Muslim workmen and people who are working in the mills. And one very famous example, which has been studied in detail by lots of historians, is the famous Tala riot, where poor Muslim workmen, this was about the demolition of a mosque. And I'm not going to go into the details about it, but what this Tala riot in 1897 exemplifies are 2 or 3 things. One is, and this the historian Dipesh Chakraborty has written about it, is that it shows some form of what he calls community consciousness. It's very interesting that people now organize around sort of broadly religious identities. Not only do they organize around religious identities, in the Tala riot we know the poor Muslim workmen, when they feel that their mosque is being demolished, they rush to Nakhoda Masjid, and one of the founders of the Nakhoda Masjid, Haji Zakaria, they write to him and saying, "You be our leader." So there is a emergence of a new kind of leadership, community leadership. That's one thing that happens. Secondly, when we look at it a little more closely, we find that in Kolkata, what is happening is that there is a new form of, there is some turbulence about property ownership. So 2 kinds of, we find through the Tala riot we can actually see it. One is Hindu property, Hindu landlords are now, for whatever reasons, are being much more assertive about their property, and this is property which large part of which is slums where poor workmen stay or the poor stay, right? They're being assertive about it. And secondly, there is a new kind of ownership about this property. There are new property owners emerging at this time, and these are the Marwadis. So there is it's very interesting. So they are also being very, very assertive at this point. And the third thing, which really creates a kind of, as I said, a flashpoint, is the plague, because the colonial state is at this point really alarmed, and they decide that enough is enough. I've written something about it. I've called it the last straw, which is the last straw that broke the back of the camel. And they said, this is enough. We have been tolerant for too long, and now we have to really move into the city. We really have to move into the city. And there is a series of legislations by which they actually sort of start cleaning up, quote unquote, the city. So there is a kind of sanitarian move, and this leads to this sort of coming together of all these forces leads to some kinds of flashpoint. And what I'm going to suggest is that it leads to new kinds of politics in the city. It's very interesting. It's very, very interesting. Now, as you can see that, so we would ask, isn't it, that where are the militants here? I mean, they don't seem to be anywhere, they don't seem to be concerned about any of these activities. But Calcutta was quite turbulent at this point, by the way. So I'll just leave it to you, but I'll just tell you about 3 responses, and then I'll come to an end of my paper. Now, what happens is that I just wanted to show you this last slide to just give you a flavor, although it's not Kolkata, but just have a look. Please have a look. This is Bombay, actually. But just to give you an idea what was happening, this is plague has come to Bombay, and you can see there is a pump, and they're individually cleaning each house. Literally spraying it and cleaning, and then people were dragged out of the houses and put in quarantine camps. The reason I'm showing you this is one of the most spectacular responses to this, and you know it, we see it as part of militant activity, is the assassination of Plague Commissioner Rand in Pune by the Chapekar brothers, right? And the of the colonial state, in some senses, sets the setting for a kind of militant activity. And if you look at the kind of writings which have happened in on the Chapekar brothers particularly, and one of the Chapekar brothers actually wrote an autobiography. It's very interesting. He really talks about the violation of private spaces, because what he feels is that the legitimacy, the legitimate move, or the kind of legitimacy the colonial state is now sort of claiming for itself in the name of trying to quell the plague has given them the opportunity to move into our homes, right? So this under no circumstances will be allowed we just cannot be allowed, because this is a violation of our private space. So militant activity to some extent was therefore has a link with the kind of interventionist nature of the colonial state itself. But this is not about Kolkata. That's the first example. The person who responded to the Tala riots, it's very interesting, was Rabindranath Tagore. Right, and he wrote an essay about it, and this Dipesh Chakraborty has written about this. In 1898, he reads a paper in the town hall in Kolkata, and it's called Kontorodh, and it is against the sedition law. In 1897, Tilak is charged by sedition. He's charged of sedition. And Tagore protests. He comes to and that essay is available. You can look at it in Rachanaboli. It's there. It's called Kontorodh. And there you'll be surprised. He makes a very interesting point. If you read it, he says, why is there such a gap between the rulers and the rule, between the British and us? He says, because they don't understand our language. So basically, if there's time, I'll read it out to you. I have the quote. There is, and so basically what he's saying, that there is a breakdown of semantics. He says when people can't understand each other, it leads to authoritarian politics. And then, so he's obviously criticizing the British, right? But in a remarkable self-criticism, he then says that look at these poor Muslim workmen in Kolkata. They are rioting. They have even come to Harrison Road, right? And but do we really understand them? And his answer is no. We just don't understand what these people are saying. And he's a very sensitive person. And he says, look, we need to understand what kind of politics is happening in the city, right? So what I'm trying to tell you is that the responses to the changing nature of the city, the changing nature of the city produces different kinds of responses. On the one hand, we have the Chapekar brothers who feel they feel violated, and therefore they want to be militants. There is Rabindranath Tagore, who is much more, who's dealing with this question much more thoughtfully and sensitively. And the third example which I'll give you, which will really surprise you, and which now comes from the militant group in Bengal, and this does not happen at the turn of the century, but only in the 1930s, is Bipin Chandra Pal. And you'll be surprised that when the Calcutta movement, the Calcutta, this interventionist move by the British in the name of the plague to really restructure the city took fruition in a very important institution which remade Kolkata in the early 20th century, in the first few decades of the 20th century. That was the setting up of the Calcutta Improvement Trust, right? So whatever you see of old municipal Calcutta today is actually been made by the Calcutta Improvement Trust. And in the 1930s, the great Bipin Chandra Pal, very much part of the militants, writes an essay full of appreciation for the work of CIT. You know, how much time do I have? Two minutes more, right? Yeah, right. So I have a quote here. So if we have a discussion, I can tell you. So it really makes you think. It makes you think about the nature of militant activity. Also, we must think about it in the long run, right? And we find that militant from the early 20th century who was against British rule was actually very appreciative of the interventionist nature of the colonial state as far as the city was concerned. So there is a paradox here. There is a paradox here between the kind of nationalist politics as far as their or what they thought, or nationalist politics in terms of its militancy, but also an appreciation of colonial rule as somebody who's as the state which is actually restructuring the whole city, and therefore is doing something good. You know, it's being appreciated about that it's something which is good for the city itself. So let me just end here to say that the relationship between the city, between Kolkata and militant, all I'm trying to say is that the relationship between the militants and the city was a complicated one. It was not as if the structure of the city produced a certain kind of politics. Militant activity had a nature of its own. The city itself was being restructured and therefore produced a certain kind of circumstance through which made possible some other kinds of politics. And there were three kinds of responses to this kind of change. One was militant activity which was antagonistic to the city, example Chapekar. Militant activity which was non-antagonistic to the city, which is Bipin Chandra Pal. And there is sort of a response which is neither antagonistic nor non-antagonistic, but thoughtful and reflective, and that of Rabindranath Tagore. I'll just end here. Just need to turn this.
হ্যাঁ হ্যাঁ আমি করে দিচ্ছি, আমি খুলে কেটে আমি দেখে নিচ্ছি। আচ্ছা একটু ওই যে একটু দেখো তো ভাই কোথায় আছে কোনটা, কোনটা ঢুকলো দেখো তো, এখানে দিয়েছি। হ্যাঁ লাল। আচ্ছা আচ্ছা আচ্ছা, এক্সিট করতে হবে। এক্সিট করো না।
Afternoon. Thank you, Professor Datta, for such a well-defined and very, very mesmerizing lecture. Could I now request our next speaker, Dr. Shormistha De, Directorate of State Archives. She's an archivist from Directorate of State Archives, Government of West Bengal. Since we've already been introduced very kindly by Dr. Bera, I won't go into a detailed introduction. I would just request Dr. De to begin with her presentation.
Good afternoon, Honorable Vice Chancellor and respected delegates and Director of State Archives. I just want to go back the era of nationalist movement, that is called the First War of Independence. We found some extraordinary documents regarding the First War of Independence in our archives, so I just try to explain it in my paper. Modern archival practice was introduced and established in India by the British and other European colonial rulers. The British in particular aspired and endeavored to build the most powerful and extensive empire. India was the jewel of the imperial crown and center of gravity of their huge imperial project. They bore the white man's burden to tell the natives of their superiority and emancipate them. India was the cradle for the genesis, development, and evolution of the imperial project. Consequently, India was at the center of anti-imperial struggle too. And all sorts of ideological organizations evolved here. And naturally, the British maintained close surveillance on all such activities, and all these records eventually turned up in the Indian archives. The present exhibition, Images of Resistance, no doubt has been prepared through a laborious hunt for an exploration of the archival records, which tells different stories of anti-imperial struggle. Some of them took place before the emergence of nationalist movement. In my paper, I shall try to highlight some stories of the Great Revolt of 1857, mostly unheard. The people here also dreamed and aspired for emancipation from the shackles of foreign rulers. In the backdrop of the first war of independence, one and only name in Eastern India earned the heroic status, that is Mongol Pandey, who revolted and was hanged by the company government. But there were other heroes too, and unfortunately their actions and dreams are hidden in the pile of archival records. First point is my antipathy to the British. Documents show that as early as June, when Meerut erupted, anti-British feeling was prevalent and increasingly explicit among the sepoys of Bengal, stationed in the northern and eastern part of Bengal Presidency. Consequently, there was a jury of the Supreme Court, through judges, transmitted a presentment to the government recommending that the native population of Calcutta and the suburbs should be disarmed and sale of arms should be prohibited. On 8th August 1857, a native spy named Tarak Chandra Sen reported to government after collecting information from the Barabazar area that I have every reason to believe that letters to and from mutineers may be caught if the shoes of the Hindustanis that travel on the roads be searched out by opening them. Next, now I am going to Eastern India, Eastern Bengal and Northeast India. The officiating collector of Sylhet reported on 12th August, I quote, "The sepoys quartered here are beginning to speak and act in a less respectful manner than formerly. In fact, last Saturday evening, one of them was very insolent to Captain Stevens. We have a well-stocked jail and treasury. We cannot send our families away, for we have nobody to escort them. Some sepoys of this division planned to murder their European officers, which was foiled, and the rebels were sent to Calcutta for court-martial. A sepoy in the Darjeeling sappers was imprisoned for seditious conversation. In Jalpaiguri, sepoys were reported to be in contact with the Bhutias. Government sent emissaries to Bhutan to find out the possible linkage between the Bhutias and the 73rd Native Infantry stationed at Dhaka. Inquiries were made about the attitudes of the chiefs of the hills of Khashia and Jayantia in view of a rumor prevalent regarding the fall of British rule. Although incidents of violence in Dhaka and Chittagong occurred in November 1857, the administration was jittery for quite some time, always looking over its shoulders lest any outbreak occurs which had the potential to destabilize the whole of Northeast. Even the topmost administrative officer, like Undersecretary to the Government of India, couldn't help but express his anxiety. I quote, "If the 73rd Native Infantry mutined at Jalpaiguri, the mutineers would as likely as direct their movement on Dhaka, from which place they would be in a position to command the surrounding districts and at a stroke to put an end to the order that at present happily prevailed there." In July 1857, the Najib guards of the establishment of the Commissioner of the Suppression of Dacoity at Jessore planned to plunder the house of the district treasurer, murdered the magistrate, and then join any set of rebels of Murshidabad. Ram Singh, a native of Murshidabad and ex-Sawar in the bodyguard of Ranjit Singh of Punjab and Zemadar in the Najib guards, was key person in this plan. Others involved in this plan were Zemadar Prayag Dubey, Ganesh Tiwari, Jiwan Khan and Shobek Dubey. A sepoy of the 63rd Native Infantry informed Ram Singh that they had turned against the government and sided with the Nawab Nazim of Murshidabad and invited Ram Singh to join them with as many as followers he could collect. About a dozen of his men were found willing to join Ram Singh. The plan was to plunder the district collectorate treasurer's house and that of another wealthy poddar, release the prisoners, some of whom would help them in the arson, and then flee to Murshidabad. Interestingly, many of the Najib guards were ex-sepoys who had affinity towards the sepoys. This plan was revealed to the administration by one Bechu Singh, who was suitably rewarded and promoted, leading to the arrest and conviction of 16 members of the Najib guards, including Ram Singh. The antipathy towards the British was so strong that those who rebelled and those who were in a rebellious mood hated those natives who were holding important positions in the administration and were mostly Bengali speaking. Proyak Dubey convicted Najib Gad in Jeshore conspiracy case and other rebels discussed among them, I quote, Delhi and Allahabad were lost to the company. Bengal proper soon would be lost when those who knew Persian might get employment and those who only knew English and Bengali would all be killed. The situation of Assam began to appear prominently in the judicial proceedings from the month of July 1857. Many soldiers of the Assam Light Infantry were from Ara district of Bihar, which was inflamed by the rebellious feeling and action. Some of them were presumably from the locality of Kanwar Singh, a legendary figure of the rebellion. Even Sarang Raja Kandarpeshwar Singh of Assam maintained close contact with this group of soldiers. The government agent of Northeast Frontier reported, I quote, the Kandarpeshwar Singh had been receiving interviews at night with 2-3 disaffected native officers of the 1st Assam Light Infantry and had been in the receipt of the most seditious letters from his agent in Calcutta, Muniram Dewan. It was also ascertained that Kandarpeshwar Singh communicated with some of the Mohajadars in order to raise the men of the old Assam militia to assist in his enterprise, and it was further known that some of the Hindustanis of the 1st Assam Light Infantry were disaffected and using seditious threats. Kandarpeshwar Singh's heavily coded correspondence with his Diwan Muniram Dutt, which was intercepted by the British, reveals that Dutt also shared Singh's dream that the British rule will be over soon. Madan Malli could read out the letters to the Raja. In one letter, Muniram informed Singh that the Badshah has taken over Hindustan and he should also be ready to take over the reins. The British got wind of this and both were put under judicial custody. Kandarpeshwar Singh till 1860 and Muniram Dutt was eventually hanged. The anti-British feeling and excitement generated by the events of rebellion were not confined within the cantonments but spread among the civilians. The government apprehended the possibility of an imminent outbreak of disturbance in Mymensingh from a letter published in Bhaskar, a vernacular newspaper, on 30th October 1857. Diwan Manohar Ali of Jila Tripura, Diwan Nasibar Reza and Abraham Hussain of Mymensingh have declared that the King of Delhi and the Nawab of Lucknow have sent them letters to the effect that the object which these kings have had in view will be accomplished if they render their assistance. All this being secretly communicated to the Daroga Aminuddin Muhammad, he in a great joy said that as his forefathers during the time of the Nawab of Dhaka had assisted the company in the possession of the country, he will in the contrary render his good offices to the king. The Daroga then desired that aforesaid Diwans to lose no time in drilling all the Lathials, that means clubmen, who could be collected as there was no room for doubt that the rule of the king would commence in India. The Farazis of North and East Bengal were a source of great concern to the British. The Farazis' population have some akin to a fanatic spirit which can any day burst to a blaze if there will be only a leader to fan their inward flame. That is reported by a government correspondence. Many soldiers were floating around in South Bengal and some were disarmed and disbanded by the company, while some deserted their units and some were from the units of the rebel warlords who were defeated. The government was very much apprehensive of the possibilities that these men who had military training would join hands with the Farazis of North and Eastern Bengal, creating a highly vulnerable situation. In Dhaka, Farazis united with the Hindustanis and hoped to liberate the district from the clutches of the company. A person named Gaibullah disclosed to the administration that 10 to 12 Farazis along with a few Hindustanis were planning an insurrection, that several thousand families of Lathials lived in the area who together with the Hindustanis could easily end the company's rule in Dhaka and Bakarganj. It should be noted that Dudu Miah, The militant leader of the Farajis, whom the administration dreaded, was in jail since April 1857. Dudu Miah was defiant and had a large number of dedicated followers in the districts of Jessore, Faridpur, Dhaka, Moimansingh, Sylhet. The government of India considered detaining him in jail till the mutiny is suppressed. Some officials went of the opinion that as long as Dudu Miah is kept from all communication with them, there is little to fear from Farajis. Keramat Ali was a Muslim scholar residing in Jaunpur in the northwest and had a large number of devout followers among the Muslims of Dhaka, Faridpur and Moimansingh. Like the Farajis, his followers were also eager to get rid of the British. He had a force somewhere near Allahabad of 4,000 men, and the others were continually flocking in to join his standard. Ali belonged to a group of educated Muslim men of Jaunpur who disliked the British rule from their core of heart, though some of them held high positions in the government. In Faridpur, on 5th December, a government report stated that an absurd rumor is said to have created a panic to all the south of the district. It is to the effect that the government have sent from Calcutta peons provided with handcuffs and chains, so every thana throughout the country and every person touched by these instruments will be enforced to enlist in the army. And rumor is not on a one-way traffic. The mutual distrust, if you explore the records of the archives, there we will find the continuous mutual distrust between the two communities, colonized and colonizers. Rumors is not a one-way traffic. The company administration was equally apprehensive that the Muslim population of Bengal would give them a crippling blow during the approaching Bakrid of 1857. A report from Sylhet dated 23rd July stated, I quote, "From the intelligence received by the day's dock, it would appear that the Muslim population of Bengal meditated or still meditate a general insurrection either on the Bakrid, the Muharram or both. In case of a Muslim insurrection, the Christian and other inhabitants of Sylhet would be at a loss how to act or on whom to depend." Now I am coming to the part 2, the second section, that is flare up, the actual action which took place at that time. The records also reveal that the south-west Bengal was equally affected as Calcutta and northeast part of the presidency by the event of 1857. While panic and apprehension overpowered the local administration in Midnapur, Bankura and Raniganj, the actual event took place in Purulia and Birbhum. The special narrative of 29th August 1857 noted that on the 5th of August, the detachment of the Ramgarh battalion stationed at Purulia, consisting of 93 men, mutined, plundered the treasury, released the prisoners, and plundered the town, bazaar, and bungalows of the European residents. Here mention may be made of Nilmani Sengdev of Pachet and Raja Arjun Singh of Purahat. The company wanted to engage such chiefs as the Zamindar of Pachet to act under the order of the Commissioner of Burdwan in maintaining law and order and peace on the Glangtang road. The Governor General in Council conferred on him the title of Raja, but it was alleged that Raja Nilmani Sengdev, the Zamindar of Pachet, was showing disaffection towards the company by not showing proper allegiance. The Secretary to the Government of Bengal in a letter dated 21st October 1857 requested the Commissioner of Burdwan to return the sum of rupees 15,000 given by the Raja and to the company and insist on his immediate obedience to the orders of government and of its officers which he had neglected to comply with. It was alleged that Zamindar of Chakla Pachet is collecting supplies from various directions and it is very likely that he is about to do mischief in the district. The Zamindar provided shelter to the mutinous sepoys of the detachment of Ramgarh battalion who revolted in Purulia. The Raja was ultimately arrested and kept in Alipur jail. The commissioner of that division reported that he had several documents found in the fortress of Kasipur clearly establishing the Zamindar's guilt. So the belief that all the Zamindars of Bengal were with the company during the revolt cannot be applied in this case. The Raja Nilmani Singdev, with his limited resources tried to defy the British. From November 1857, action took precedence over rumor, apprehension and conspiracy. On 21st November 1857, the 73rd Native Infantry offered strong opposition while European sailors went to disarm them at Lalbagh, Dhaka. I quote, the determined resistance of the sepoys, their strong positions, and the fact of their raising guns at their command prevented, unfortunately, the complete success to disarm them and enabled a considerable number of them to escape with arms in their hands. The presumption was that they would join the main body of their corps at Jalpaiguri, when probably there would be another uprising. The state of the Jalpaiguri regiment was not very comfortable either. I quote, the regiment was stationed in a very doubtful and uneasy state, posting up themselves as it would appear extra sentries in their own lines, giving out that disturbance is at hand and at the point of breakout. It was apprehended that if the flames of the revolt reached Jalpaiguri, it would spread towards northwest as wildfire. From Jalpaiguri, they would march towards west through Kishanganj and Purnia, plundering the civil stations, devastating large extent of rich and populous country studded with indigo factories and thriving towns and marketers. The large portion of Rangpur, Dinajpur, Purnia and Malda were also considered vulnerable in case of revolt at Jalpaiguri. Documents show that the mutineers of Dhaka made a serious attempt to reach Jalpaiguri. They headed towards Rangpur, crossed the Brahmaputra at Bagawa, where they shot a barkandaj of the Madariganj Thana and then moved northwards to reach Jalpaiguri. Another document states that on their way to Rangpur, they had entered Bhutan on 8th December. The area was riverine and difficult to access, and hence it seems the British could not track the movement of the rebels as well as they wished. Moreover, they had to depend on inputs from local sources, and some official account seems to be contradicted in this regard. As this rebel of 73rd Native Infantry proceeded, they left behind a trail of loot and plunders, spending alarm and apprehension in the adjacent places. The report submitted by the Judge of the Mymensingh also gave a vivid description. The tension further aggravated as the desertion of the 11th Irregular Cavalry occurred near Rani Shankal Thana of Dinajpur. The irregular cavalry's desertion and their westward movement made unnerved the administration of Purnia. Officiating Magistrate of Purnia reported, I quote, there has been great alarm felt throughout the district since the sowars of the 11th Irregular Cavalry who deserted from Jalpaiguri marched to the direction of Purnia. For the last 2 or 3 days, the bazaar and town has been deserted. 1, 2 or 3 nights during the absence of the troops from the station, all the European women and children of Purnia were given temporary accommodation to the jail, where I had made preparations for the protection of the jail itself. And another interesting document. In Dhaka, the fortification was approved as an excellent emergency shelter for the European inhabitants. The local Christian inhabitants of Firangi Bazar worked hard to finish the fort within 2-3 days. An extreme feeling of insecurity engrossed the mind of the Europeans. In the absence of adequate force, the Commissioner of Revenue and Circuit hailed the government vessel Meghna as a symbol of security. He stated, I quote, we are so unprotected. I have been taken on myself the responsibility of retaining the government brig Meghna for a short time. The presence of a government vessel on the river as of itself likely to cause much good. In Borishal too, uneasiness prevailed. The European residents were sending away their families to the interior of the district and burying their valuables. They were hastily fortifying a home in the station to defend themselves until a force arrives from Calcutta. On 18th November, 34th Native Infantry at Chittagong revolted. They plundered the treasury, let loose the prisoners, burned down their own lines, and then left the place. Along with the whole wealth of the treasury, the European inhabitants of the town were petrified. The ladies of the situation were placed on board of vessels, and for 2 nights, while the gentlemen slept in the Commissioner of Circuit's house, the administration tried to reassure them, but as they barely managed to escape with their lives, they were consequent in some dread, and every rumor tends to increase it. In the absence of European troops, the mutineers could not be properly dealt with. The local administration admitted that they had no men on whom they could depend. Some 11 or 12 understand the musket drill, and about 30 probably be able to load a gun. And such insignificant force was considered as worse than useless against so much larger a body of men throughout who were thoroughly trained. The Chittagong mutineers actually entered in Kachar from Tripura. It seemed that not getting help from Tripura Raj, they intended to reach Manipur through Kachar. At that time, few rebel chiefs of Manipur, including the ex-Raja of Manipur, Devendra Vijay Singh, were residing in Kachar, and they joined hands with the rebellion in order to dethrone the then king of Manipur, who was a mere puppet of the British government. The British administration had to face the challenge of crushing the revolt, as well as of maintaining the stability of the kingdom of Manipur and the northeast frontier. Moreover, a considerable number of up-country men were present in Assam Light Infantry, whose presence was not desirable at this moment of crisis, but the government was helpless in the absence of the European force. The superintendent of Kachar reported an encounter on the 12th January 1858 in the vicinity of the Burma Kandi between the detachment of troops under Captain Stevens, Lieutenant Ross and Buist and the rebels of 34th Regiment Northeast Native Infantry, who had been joined by one of the Princess Manipur, Narendrajit Singh. According to government report, another encounter occurred on 22nd January and few women and children were found in the rebel group and were imprisoned. In the fierce encounter that took place on 26 January 1858, a considerable number of rebels were killed. The king of Manipur actively supported the government by offering his force in these encounters. Though the king of Manipur was pro-British, there were 6 princes who joined hands with the rebels. Among them, Princess Narendrajit, Haojao and Khwarekha were mainly sent to Alipur jail for detention. Within first half of 1858, government almost successfully controlled the revolt, but anti-British feeling and its expression in the frontier region didn't allow the government to settle down with a peaceful state of mind. Actually, the anti-British feeling was still persisted even in the first half of 1858. I will end with this is a document which is the list of the things plundered by the Chittagong mutineers. The revolt was crushed, but the feeling of insecurity of the British was very much present, and they still sought administrative help for more European seamen, able-bodied seamen, with a view to them being stationed at much central places as Pabna and Jeshore for the purpose of reassuring the people. So, and with an interesting quote, I would end my paper here. Stolen stamp and stationery bought in the Kumrakhali Bazaar, law and order situation had been broken down in the period of turmoil. The Kumrakhali people had for the past month heard the exaggerated stories of the khalasis of the steamer. They knew that the rebellion raged in the northwest provinces and in the parts of Bengal. They had lately seen steamers past crowded with English ladies and children who they heard had barely escaped. Government treasury plundered, government buildings burned down, and many stations were in the hands of the insurgents. They saw valuable property described as Kompanire Lutara Mal, offered for a trifling sum. They thought that the tide of massacre would soon reach the districts and they could already share in the plunder without fear of punishment. During the uprising, the British administration paid little attention to these regions, so did the historians of the uprising. Yet, there was no doubt that the periphery was connected to the epicenter. The historians have so far focused to the epicenter and remained oblivious to the periphery. This certainly needs to be corrected. That will enrich the understanding of the epic struggle, which is a watershed in the history of modern India. Also, these regions were soon to take center stage and challenge of British rule and superiority both with and without guns. Continuity in the narrative of the epic, both in spatial and temporal dimension, is needed. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you, Dr. De, for a wonderful presentation. Could I now ask, the floor is open for questions. So, if you have questions. Only one question? Okay. We have time only for one question. প্রশ্ন আছে? You have a question? Okay. Please make it brief.
শ্রদ্ধেয় পার্থবাবুকে আমার দু একটা জিনিস একটু শুধু মানে জানবার জন্যই বলা। আর আমার ভালোবাসার শিক্ষক মানে সুরঞ্জন দার কাছে বলার সুযোগ পাচ্ছি তার সামনে, এই আনন্দ বোধহয় রাখার নয়। পার্থবাবুকে যেটা আমি জানতে চাইছি, আমি জানবার জন্য বলছি, যে বারবার করে বলা হচ্ছে যে ঔপনিবেশিক শহরের একটা নিজস্ব চরিত্র আছে, তার নিজস্ব আত্মবিকাশের পথে, বিপ্লবী আন্দোলনের পথে, জাতীয়তাবাদী চিন্তা চেতনার পথে কলকাতার কথা বারবার উল্লেখ করা হলো। তার সপক্ষে অনেক প্রমাণ উনি দিয়েছেন। আর একটা কথা হয়তো বললে ভালো হতো, যেহেতু গরিব মানুষের মধ্যে দাঙ্গা সবসময় দুঃখের, কিন্তু মানে টালার দাঙ্গার কথা মনে আছে, কিন্তু তার পাশাপাশি গাড়োয়ানদের একটা ধর্মঘট হয়েছিল, সেটাও গরিব মানুষের সম্মিলিত একটা মানে প্রতিরোধ চেতনা, সেটাও আমাদের মনে রাখতে হবে। তেমনি ওই ধরনেরই ঔপনিবেশিক শহরের বৈশিষ্ট্য তো আমরা ডাবলিনেও দেখছি। সেখানে জেমস জয়েসের মানে ইউলিসিস বলুন বা লিওন ইউডিসের রিডেমশন উপন্যাসের বলুন, সেখানেও ওই ঔপনিবেশিক শহরের মধ্যে একটা বিপ্লবী আত্মা ধিকি ধিকি করে জ্বলছে, তার আত্মবিকাশ ঘটছে ইত্যাদি ইত্যাদি। কিন্তু তথাকথিত যারা স্বাধীন শহর, আমি মস্কোর কথা মনে হচ্ছে, প্যারিসের কথা মনে হচ্ছে। মস্কোতে প্রায় একই সময় 1905-এ জারের শকট লক্ষ্য করে বোমা মারা হয়েছিল। যারা ধরা পড়েছিল তাদের একজনের ভাইয়ের নাম ভ্লাদিমির ইলিচ উলিয়ানভ, যাকে সারা পৃথিবী চেনে লেনিন বলে। তো সেই বিপ্লবী আন্দোলনের ঘরানা তথাকথিত মস্কো শহরেও ছিল, বা ফ্রান্সেও যেটা ছিল ওই সন্ত্রাস রাজত্বের সময়। মানে ভিক্টর হুগোর 93-তে পড়ি যে মানে সেলাইয়ের প্যাটার্ন আঁকছে সামনে ওই তথাকথিত মানে ঝুবড়িবাসী মানে মহিলারা, সেটা দেখে বিপ্লবী মানে বিচারক ভাবছেন যে মানে গিলোটিনে মানে দেবেন কি দেবেন না। আমার একটাই প্রশ্ন, তথাকথিত স্বাধীন শহরের যে প্রতিবাদের চেতনা, আত্মবিকাশের চেতনা, আর ঔপনিবেশিক শহরের যে প্রতিবাদের চেতনা, তার কি কোনো ডিগ্রিগত তারতম্য আছে? আমি শুধু বুঝতে চাইছি। সবাইকে অনেক শ্রদ্ধা।
One more question? আর আজ ও বোধহয় একটা প্রশ্ন করছে।
Yes, ma'am. I am from School of Education, Adamas University. My name is Oronno Pal, and it was indeed a nice presentation taken by all the speakers, those who are present here. My question is to ma'am. Just now, ma'am has given a description about the Sepoy mutiny. During this time, there was a Greece incident, Greece Curtis incident took place. Ma'am, can you please elaborate, na? Just trace something on that actually. Did it take place during this time, Greece Curtis incident?
Okay. So
What is
could
it?
I ask the speakers to please come
And
and answer the question?
did it lead to a rift between the Hindu and the Muslims?
Okay, thank you for that wonderful question that you asked. I just wanted to tell you that it's perhaps a little difficult to make a difference between, so to answer the question whether colonial cities can be made different from cities which we don't see as colonial. So say, let us take London for instance. Then in that case, we will have to really understand the nature of that city, and then that's what I was trying to argue. And if we find revolutionary activity in that city, then we will have to understand the nature of that revolutionary activity and then try to make the connections between the two. To my surprise, I have found that most historians, including of the stature of E.J. Hobsbawm, don't find this one-to-one connection. They make the argument that it doesn't happen like that. But in the historiography itself, historians take the city for granted. They think Kolkata was here, Kolkata chilo, Roshak Road ei hoto, Upper Circular Road ei hoto, Gopi Mohan Dotto Lane ei holo. Therefore, the city must have been very important to militant activity. That is the job of the historians, to show the connection. I did not find that much. And let me tell you that argument that Sumit Sarkar made about the disconnect between the city and politics. If you actually look at early militant Bengali activity in between say 1905 and to 1920, most of the participants, this is Peter Hees has shown it very well, most of them had nothing to do with Calcutta. They came from outside the districts of Calcutta. And secondly, most of the events that happened, the throwing of bombs, the assassination happens, also most of it happened outside Kolkata. So the relationship between Kolkata and militant politics is actually a fraught one. And this is the same question that we have to ask about the other cities as well. Thank you. Huh. 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 Yeah. Yes, yes. I mentioned, Sumita mentioned. Huh. So let me answer this question. It's very interesting. I'm glad you raised this because there was no time to talk about it. You know, so the great restructuring of Paris happened during 1850s by Haussmann. And what Benjamin has written, Walter Benjamin in a very famous essay has written that what was the sort of the goal of Haussmann? The goal of Haussmann was a political one. He wanted to suppress working class militancy. So he actually increased the widths of the street so you could not put barricades. But do you know what happened? No. And but let me tell you, 20 years after Haussmann had worked on Paris and increased the width, in 1871 the Paris Commune happens. So the Paris Commune happens despite the fact that the city structure had changed and was anti-working class. So that's what actually Hobsbawm gives this example. He says the Paris Commune happened. It did not happen because by that way Paris had been de-revolutionized by Haussmann. So there shouldn't have been no revolution. But that's not how the connection between cities and politics are actually understood. Okay.
Sir, I have to be a revolutionary here. Nisha has been, yeah, I'm sorry, sir. I have to, that is why I said I have to be a revolutionary here. I'm very sorry, sir, very sorry. Apologies. I cannot take any more question, any more requests. Sir, I request you, Honorable Vice Chancellor, sir, to come over to stage to felicitate. This we should have done earlier, but because of paucity of time, to felicitate Professor Sanjoy Mukhopadhyay. Sir, please come to stage. Professor Trideep Chakraborty, sir, please come. Sorry, I was informed that. Sorry, sir. Dr. Sormishta De, archivist. Professor Shahara Ahmed. Ma'am, I'm so sorry for, intervening in your session, but then I had to do this. Professor Partho Dotto, sir, please come. I request Oindrila and team to please. Yeah, we are very grateful to all of you for, bearing with us. Yeah, while the felicitation goes on, I'll do my job. Please go to the convention center for the inauguration of the state exhibition organized by the West Bengal State Archives at the convention center. Trideep sir, paben to? Sir, ache. Sir, ache. Okay. Inaugural speaker, Shimonti De. She's your felicitation.